Hello again. I've putting the glasses on top of my head. I have the bit of an owl flame going here. And it's lovely, the flame. It reminds me of growing up back in the 1970s in the old cottages with the open fire and the lights would be turned off. And you'd have the flames of the fire dancing shadows on the wall. It used to be lovely, a lovely setting. And them old cottages, they were designed for that setting, for the family to gather round the fire at night time. And even when there'd be no storytelling, on the winter's nights there'd be an old wireless up on the shelf, and the light would be off and the flames would be dancing shadows on the wall, and you'd hear some old radio commentator talking about cattle and land and it'd be turned down real low and everyone would be snoozing at the fire, overcoats over the chairs and the smell of turf smoke. It was a very simple time, and wasn't always an easy time, but it was simple, a very simple way of life. You know, there wasn't that great want in people. You tended to accept things the way they were. But I used to hear lovely stories back in them days. And my favourite ones were about my grandfather and my great-grandfather and even my father. And they used to tell me about my great-grandfather. He was a clockmaker. And he'd a fairly long association with the landlord Pilkington of Tor House, and I believe he used to work the harvest months up there. He'd a horse, a working horse, maybe two of them, I think. He used to do ploughing for him and everything, and he used to get paid a man's day's money for each horse, and a day's money for himself, and that kept the horses. But he was also a clockmaker, and he'd lost his land. He put all his money, the money he made from clockmaking, into making a farm out of a cutaway bog, and he built a stone cottage and got run off it by a stronger family. And it was then that he got involved with landlord Pilkington and turned the money to rear his 9 children in the peat bog. Built a big hut on stilts over the Silver River, and had a big oak beam, and it stood for over 63 years, nearly 70 years it stood. But when he was working up in the old Tor House, he also had I think he got £12 a year for winding and repairing the clocks in the house. And so he done all right out of them. But he was up there one time, and he was a great storyteller. And he got very involved with the actual day-to-day running of that house, right to the point of the witchcraft that they believe was going on. Him and his mate Patsy Kelly were off and out at night, and they got paid for that as well, hunting what they believed to be the Hair Witch. But she was believed to have a spell on Pilkington's cows. They weren't given milk. But before I get to that part, he used to tell, he was a great storyteller. These stories have come down to my grandfather, to my father and to me. And one night, he was late evening, he was up working up round the Tor House, and this beggar man, tramp, came along the Tor Road and begged him to give him a place to lie down. And he said, well, I shouldn't, but he said, go up to the rear of the house, he said, and lie down in the stables in the straw for the night. And I'll say nothing. He said, I'll go into the cook house and I'll bring you out a bite here So I done that anyway, and God, during the night, didn't this beggar man die in the straw? He passed away, and there was a considerable amount of money on his person. My great-grandfather didn't know what to do with this, and he was that kind of a man that it ate away at his conscience. So he went to the priest and he said, I've had this money for a week now, but he says his apparition is coming back every night. He says, I don't know, and I know, he said, it's something to do with the money. So the priest thought and he said, I'll tell you what you'll do, John, he said. Go to 3 parishes, go to Kilbeggan Church. He said, go to Terrace Pass Church and go to Rochford Bridge Church and divide up the money and give it to the church, he said. Because he done that, and that was the end of the ghost. He never seen him again after that. And they were the stories he used to tell in that hut. And there was another time, it was when they were hunting this hare witch. And you can imagine, I reckon he had over 100 acres of land, my great-grandfather. And it was land he reclaimed, and he worked hard on it, and a lot of cattle on it. And this family of land grabbers, there was 5 or 6 of them in it, and he was on his own. And they bullied him for two years before they got him out of that cottage and got the land off him. But anyway, it was, we found the records. He went to prison for a couple of years, but we never knew what he went to prison for. And I believe it was something to do with the fact that this hare witch that had been putting the spell on Pilkin's cows. Now she was a very aggrieved woman that was put off the land by the landlord Pilkin. They were evicted, and her husband died, and she turned to the devil and the black arts. She brought awful trouble to Pilkin, and through hunting her, my great-grandfather met her son, and he was what you'd call a hare smith. She was a hare witch. They reckon she could turn into a hare. She could suckle cows. She could do all kinds of things. And her son, after she died, became a hare smith. And he could do certain things with hares that he had learnt off her. Not turn into them like her. He wasn't as powerful as she was. But the story went that the night the old lady died in my great-grandfather's marital home that they took, the priest was called, and he came out he was over in Dangan seeing somebody else, and he made his way back down the Dangan road for Derry Coffee. And by the time he got to the cottage, there was 40 hares in a circle round the cottage, and she was dying it in the cottage, and they wouldn't let the priest in. And they reckoned that my great-grandfather had something to do with that, through this lad, the hare smith. And, they reckoned that was the power of the land and the Irish people, the way they stood up to these foreigners that came in and took the land, like the Pilkinans, and then the Anglo-Irish, they call them. They were Irish-born of English background, and they took all the rent money, and this is the way they fought them. And when you hear about Irish fairies and all that, there's a lot more to it than people think, and it goes back. It was stuff that was practiced by these old people, and to great effect, I can tell you. And they're just some of the stories that I heard growing up, just from my own people. And that was, you could go over they used to come over from Road, Dangan, and the bogs in road, Gar and all them bogs, over to Ringbog. And these people were put off the land. And they came back. The things they done was unbelievable. The English didn't get it all their own way. And some story that.